Well, actually, I must say it was good to have Winnie the Pooh quoted this morning, because he's actually, and the characters are one of my favourite set of characters. I think there's some real, and it's probably just my primary school teacher background as well, coming through there. But often there is much wisdom that comes through seeming simplicity. And our opening text this morning is one of those texts that seems quite simple and straightforward, and one which I think you are all very familiar with. We'll just see if this will come up on the screen for us. It's found in Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. And if you have your Bibles there, let's turn to it together. Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. So familiar, I'm sure you could probably quote it by heart. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. And I'm sure that's one that many a morning and many an occasion you will turn to that very familiar promise of God's leading. There is what I would call a parallel proverb to this one, and we don't tend to turn to it and quote it quite as much, but in many ways I think the two, I would argue, go together. There is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. And one of those scripture passages that we may not decide to turn to on a regular basis, but and yet speaks great truth. Solomon here suggests that there is something about us as humans that can be absolutely convinced that we're on the right path, but in the end can be headed somewhere totally different. And that's a sobering thought if we realize that individually we are capable of being so sure that we're right in the midst of being wrong. I want to park that thought and just come back to it in a couple of moments. You know, there is a stretch of water in the world that since the 1950s has become legendary. In fact, the very first article was a journalist who in the year 1950 suggested that there was a body of water that had some supernatural overtones to it, that there were things happening there that couldn't be explained by human reasoning. In 1952, there was an article that took even greater root in people's minds. It was called Sea Mystery at Our Back Door. And it looked at the loss of planes and ships and suggested paranormal circumstances were associated with their disappearance. And he was the very first one, George Sand, in 1952, to actually map out this triangle and to suggest that there was something going on here we needed to know more about. And one of the losses that he referred to was Flight 19. And other people took up the story about Flight 19, and it became published and became almost the example of why we had to take this seriously. And the story was of 5 torpedo bombers that on December 5, 1945, took off from an Air Force base, Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and never returned. And just as a little bit of background about this particular flight, this was the Lieutenant Charles Taylor who was leading the squadron that day. It was a training flight. About 3 years earlier, Lieutenant Taylor had earned his wings. And although he had done a little bit of combat involvement in planes in Second World War, not a lot. In fact, his main role became training other pilots for the war. And so this was about 3 months after the war had officially finished, and Fort Lauderdale was still busy. There were still many people being trained, because although the war was over, there was still this feeling in the United States that they needed to continue to develop a powerful force. And so he was leading, and if you have a look where Fort Lauderdale is there, just in the little red area, and I'm just going to see, I think I might be able to, no, that's okay. Yeah. So their task this day was to fly east towards the Bahamas and then north and then back to Fort Lauderdale. So a bit of a triangle. Should have taken them about 2.5 hours altogether. Now, one thing about Lieutenant Taylor that some of the early tales about the Bermuda Triangle doesn't include is the fact that he had already been rescued 3 times from having to ditch his plane in the ocean. And 2 of those 3 times was because he just got lost. He just got disorientated, couldn't find his way back, ditched the plane, and they came and grabbed him. And on this particular morning that they left, he arrived late, which was a little unforgivable in the Air Force there. And as he arrived, he just said to the people in charge, could I please be swapped out? He didn't want to go. And they refused the request. So he led, and the group of men he was leading, there were 14 altogether, were doing their very final training flight in the torpedo bombers. And after this flight, navigating their way around this triangle on the water, they were going to get their wings. And of course, December 5, what was probably uppermost in these young men's mind, they were all young men, was they were 20 days away from Christmas. And World War II had just finished. They were looking forward to being back with their families. The first Christmas for many years without the war. They never came back, and they've never found the planes. But what I'd like to share with you is the radio-controlled transcript between the planes and Fort Lauderdale Tower. And then let's see what we can learn from that. So what you're going to find here is a couple of, every time you see a line drawn, just a straight line, that means time has passed. L is Lieutenant Taylor. You'll also see a couple of other characters, P, which is Powers, was his surname, and B, which was Bossy. There were 2 other people interacting from the team he was leading. So let's have a look at what happened, and you see if you can draw your conclusions as to what went on. Lieutenant Taylor, F228 to Bossy, you seem to be taking us off the assigned navigational course, over. Bossy, negative, Lieutenant Taylor. According to my compass, I am on the correct course. Listen, Bossy, we are not on the planned route. Alice, you lead and correct our position, over. Roger, Lieutenant. Some time passes. The lieutenant speaks. Powers, this is not making much sense. How long have we been in the air? Powers, we've been airborne 1 hour, 45 minutes. Lieutenant, we should be seeing land by now. There's nothing out there. Powers says, maybe we're flying too far east. Well, east was where they were meant to be flying. That was the planned route. Lieutenant talks to the tower. Fort Lauderdale Tower, this is Foxtrot 28. We seem to be off course and we cannot see land. Repeat, we cannot see land. Can you give us a fix, over? The tower says, Roger that, over. Foxtrot 28, this is Fort Lauderdale. What is your current position, over? Lieutenant says, Fort Lauderdale Tower, we are unable to confirm our current position, over, which must have confused the members in the other 4 aircraft who were following him, because they could all tell from their instruments where they were. And you can see some of his team begin to speak up. Tower says, F228, F228, you just need to head due west due west. Do you read? So, of course, they're still travelling east. And if everyone's confused, the easiest thing to do is turn your planes around, just fly west. You're going to hit land there somewhere. Lieutenant, roger that. We don't know which way west is. Everything is wrong. And one of the trainees speaks up, Powers, Taylor, if your compass isn't working, maybe one of us should take the lead. Negative, says the lieutenant. Lieutenant Taylor, says Bossy, sir, don't you think that we should go west? My instruments appear to be working. Do you want me to take the lead, sir? Bossy, maintain your position. Over. The control tower still hasn't an exact fix on the planes, but knows from radio signal strength they are east and not too far away. They instruct them to fly southwest, and at that moment in time, Lieutenant Taylor does what is instructed by Fort Lauderdale Tower, turns the squadron around and flies as directed, southwest. So they're on that route back to Fort Lauderdale. Lieutenant, FT-28 to Port Everglades. Listen, Baker, if I am that close to you, I should be able to see land. Tower, sir, please. You have enough fuel to reach us. Just keep flying towards me. Lieutenant, Baker, I don't think this is the right direction. So he turns the planes around and heads east again, away from land. Tower, FT-28, this is Port Everglades. You have enough fuel to reach us. Do you read me? And then on the recording, there is the audible sound of him turning around and saying to the others in the room, why are they ignoring me? Powers, Taylor, maybe we should fly 270 degrees until we hit the beach or run out of gas. Taylor, do you read? Lieutenant says, we didn't fly far enough east before we turned. How long have we been going in this direction? Where on earth are we? We must be over the southern Gulf. That's the Gulf, don't you think? So now where Taylor thinks he is in here. And he thinks then, if this is where he is, he better keep flying east until he reaches land. And that's despite the fact that he took off from here and flew east. But somehow in his mind, he now believes he's somewhere quite different. Powers, the Gulf, negative. We've gone too far east. Suggest we fly west till we run out of gas. We have a better chance of being picked up close to shore. The lieutenant says, I don't know. We didn't even see the shore. At this point, Training Flight 19 flew out of radio range, and nothing was ever heard from them again. I think you can probably figure it out what went wrong with flight training, flight number 19, where Lieutenant in the end became absolutely convinced that this is where he was and that to reach land, despite the fact that the other four planes knew which way they wanted to head, but in a day where you had learnt to obey commands, particularly within the Army, Air Force, Navy, everyone followed, despite the fact that they knew they were going the wrong way. You know, one of the things that sticks out to me about this was the fact that he actually had sufficient evidence to know that he was probably going the wrong way, and yet refused to change his opinion. One of the things that has been interesting to read is air accident investigators who take that transcript and then come up with the scenario of what they think happened, what went wrong. And this was from an investigator by the name of Phil Giles. People decide on something And then with the distress of the occasion, they will stick with that initial concept because in their mind, it is very real. Once Lieutenant Taylor, got this mindset, it was going to stay with him forever. No one was going to jog him out of it. You know, there's a condition that psychologists talk about called confirmation bias, where as humans, we're very likely, once we have an opinion or a standpoint on something, we're likely to hang on to it. And even when new evidence and information comes along, we will tend to interpret that within the world view that we already have. And it can be fairly unusual for people to change their opinion. Another phenomena, however, and I don't know, is there anyone here who is a pilot who has flown small planes? There's another challenge called spatial disorientation. And when I was 17, I decided I wanted to learn to fly, and I only got through about the first 12 lessons before I decided as a youngster my money needed to be spent on something else, like a motorbike. And so that's as far as it went. But one thing I did learn was that if you are up in a cloud or in a place where you were not able clearly to see the ground, it's really easy to become disorientated. You can actually feel that you're flying level and absolutely sure that you're not either banking or descending. And the flight instructor would say to me, look at your dials. You're actually banking about 30 degrees to the left and headed towards the ground. Even though I didn't sense that. And it's one of those things that have been the downfall of many pilots, if they don't keep their eye on the instruments. The other place that I've experienced it is here. I don't know if any of you have been on the ski field at a time where there's a whiteout. The snow is coming down, and you look out and everything is white. You can't distinguish the ground from just the air around you. And you can't see where the dips are, where the bumps are, whether you're going down or up, and it's disconcerting. I remember just standing still, scared to move. Didn't know whether I was about to head down a steep slope. But that disorientation of wondering which way is up, which way is down. I want you to think just for a moment of spatial disorientation in a spiritual sense. The ease at which you and I can become spiritually disorientated. We rush, we become complacent, we become confident, and we begin to make decisions without consulting God, perhaps as we once did. Divine wisdom is traded for human wisdom. And for the person who wrote this, they would have experienced so graphically what it was like to once rely on the wisdom of God, to be the wisest man, and yet to become spiritually disorientated, to forget which way was up and which way was down. He became blind to his true position, being so sure where he thought he should be, and yet really far, far away. I personally don't believe that the Bermuda Triangle has anything supernatural about it, but I do believe that a place exists that does. Let me show you one such reality, just in case you were hoping to avoid this particular place. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short. You know, whether you or I like it, we live in an enchanted place, a place where things are not as they always appear, a place where what we think is up is sometimes down. And one of the things that interests me when I look at the book of Revelation is the fact that before his return, God says that things will be so bad that even his church is going to be characterized by this disorientation. You say, I am rich, I have acquired wealth and do not need a thing. But you do not realize that you are wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. So my message that I wanted to bring to you at Wallsend today is a very simple one. We live, I believe, in one of the most incredible parts of Earth's history. A time where more than we ever have needed, we need prayer. And we need time in God's Word to stay orientated. One of the passages that challenges me is that from John 15, verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If a man remains in me and I in him, he will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. You know, I don't know about you, but when I think back to when I did maths at school, and they talked about, zero, nothing, the number zero. How much is zero? It really is nothing. And God says, without me and without the wisdom and strength that I bring, you can do nothing. No good. And when I contemplate that, I realize as I look back over my life how easy it has been for me when I come in, for example, to a new job and I sense God's need and I realize my incapacity and I pray and I rely on him and he works and does what only he can do. Yet over a period of time, how easy is it to become a little complacent, a little confident, and to not be spending the same time in prayer that perhaps we once did. I'd simply like to suggest this morning that we, all of us, are in need of much connection with the master owner of the vineyard, to the one who can connect us with the true source of wisdom. You know, shortly after Lieutenant Taylor and his training squadron went out of radio contact, never to be heard from again, Fort Lauderdale was able to establish their position. At the time they were following the direction of the control tower, just before Lieutenant Taylor turned everyone around and flew back to sea, they worked out they were 25 minutes from home. 25 minutes. And you can see on the screen there the pictures of those men who didn't return and whose families that Christmas Day had to mourn that despite the passing of World War II, they were going to miss their loved ones forever. 25 minutes from home, ignoring the control tower, and ending up probably, they think, 2.5 hours out at sea before their petrol ran out, still heading in the wrong direction. Now, the saddest thing I can think of is for us here, so close to home, so close. How sad it would be to find us still heading out to sea in the wrong direction, so confident we are right, that we have it together, still arguing about right and wrong, still desperately believing and ignoring all the advice from the heavenly control tower. And if there's one thing that I challenge myself with, it's that, Kevin, you need to distrust your own judgment, your own opinion, your own pride. All of us, with heart, mind, and soul, needs to put on the armor of God spoken of in Ephesians chapter 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. That's my prayer for us all this morning.